On Friday afternoon, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, the man who spent the last several years defending Donald Trump in criminal court before being installed as the second highest law enforcement official in the country, stood before cameras and was asked a question that should have triggered emergency protocols in any functional justice department. The question wasn't about policy. It wasn't about budget cuts or reorganization. It was about mass resignations. Federal prosecutors in Minneapolis, already bleeding talent, are now threatening to walk out in coordinated waves. The Civil Rights Division in Washington is seeing similar threats. FBI agents across field offices are reportedly drafting exit paperwork. And when Blanche was asked what he made of this exodus, this institutional hemorrhaging that has already claimed thousands of career attorneys and agents, he didn't have an answer. He had a smirk. That moment, captured in real time, is the breaking point. Because when the Department of Justice can no longer retain the people who prosecute civil rights violations, who investigate corruption, who handle the most sensitive criminal cases in the country, you don't have a Justice Department anymore. You have a hollowed-out shell being run by defense attorneys and political operatives who treat federal law enforcement like a personal law firm for the executive branch. And the people who swore oaths to the Constitution, not to any president, have reached their limit. Here's what actually happened on Friday, and why it signals something far more dangerous than standard bureaucratic turnover. Todd Blanche, who represented Trump through 2 impeachments and multiple criminal indictments before his current appointment, held a press conference that was supposed to project confidence. Instead, it exposed panic. When asked about the significant resignations already underway in Minneapolis and the threats of additional mass walkouts from the Civil Rights Division, Blanche defaulted to the kind of dismissive rhetoric we've come to expect from this administration. But the question itself was the news. Because federal prosecutors don't typically telegraph their resignations, they don't hold press conferences about their moral objections, they file their papers, they clean out their desks, and they move on. When they start warning publicly that they're leaving and why, they're sending a signal to the public that something has gone catastrophically wrong inside the building. To understand the gravity of this moment, you need to understand who these people are. We're not talking about political appointees who serve at the pleasure of the president and expect to leave when administrations change. We're talking about career assistant United States attorneys, career prosecutors who have spent 10, 15, 20 years building cases against drug traffickers, corruption rings, hate groups, and violent offenders. We're talking about FBI agents with specialized expertise in counterintelligence and complex financial crimes. These are people who could make triple their salaries in private practice but stayed because they believed in the mission. And now they're leaving not because they got better offers, but because they can no longer look themselves in the mirror and say they work for an institution that still believes in the rule of law. Here's where this gets serious. The Minneapolis office isn't just any field office. It's been handling some of the most sensitive civil rights investigations in the country, including the aftermath of high-profile police misconduct cases and domestic terrorism threats in the upper Midwest. When prosecutors there start resigning in protest, they're not just leaving a job. They're abandoning active cases. They're leaving victims without advocates. They're creating vacuum where justice is supposed to be served. And according to multiple reports, the exodus has already reached catastrophic levels. Thousands of attorneys and agents have left since January, stripping the department of irreplaceable institutional knowledge and expertise. But Friday's threats represent a new phase. This isn't quiet resignation anymore. This is organized, principled resistance from within. Sources indicate that prosecutors who had been holding on, who had been telling themselves they could weather the storm, keep their heads down, protect their cases from political interference, have reached their breaking point. And the breaking point, according to those familiar with the discussions, centers on 3 specific areas of disgust that have converged into a crisis of conscience. First, there is the department's handling of the Epstein files. We're not talking about conspiracy theories or internet speculation. We're talking about the actual documented evidence related to Jeffrey Epstein's criminal network, the flight logs, the client lists, the documentation of who traveled to his properties and when. Career prosecutors who have seen the actual files, who know what evidence exists, are watching as the department drags its feet redacts names, and treats the disclosure of child sex trafficking evidence like a political hot potato rather than a moral imperative. These are prosecutors who built their careers putting predators in prison. They're now being told to stand down, to slow walk investigations, to treat powerful names with kid gloves, and they're refusing. Second, there is the weaponization of the department against political enemies and the refusal to investigate actual crimes committed against political targets. The case of Don Lemon has become a flashpoint here. According to reports, career prosecutors in Los Angeles looked at the evidence regarding threats and potential criminal activity targeting the journalist and effectively said, "We're not touching this," not because there's no case, but because pursuing it would cross the political powers that now control the department. Meanwhile, prosecutors in Minneapolis have reportedly been pressured to pursue cases against Trump's enemies while being explicitly told to drop or delay investigations that might implicate his allies. When law enforcement becomes selective based on political loyalty, it ceases to be law enforcement. It becomes enforcement. Third, and perhaps most emotionally devastating for the career staff, is the department's response to the murders of Alex Pretti and Renee Nicole Good. These were not just statistics. They were people, advocates, citizens, who were killed in circumstances that demanded rigorous federal investigation. The post-murder handling by the department, described by insiders as dismissive and politically motivated, appears to have been the final straw for prosecutors who were already hanging on by a thread. When you're told to look away from violence, to treat certain victims as less worthy of justice because of their political associations or the circumstances of their deaths, you're not being asked to do your job. You're being asked to betray your oath. This is the part no one can ignore. We are watching the institutional collapse of federal law enforcement in real time. When the Deputy Attorney General, a man whose primary qualification for the job was his loyalty to a criminal defendant, is asked about mass resignations and treats it as a joke, he's telling you exactly what this administration thinks of the Justice Department. They don't see it as an independent institution bound by law. They see it as an instrument to be used and discarded. And the professionals who actually understand how to prosecute cases, how to build investigations, how to protect the public, are leaving before they become complicit in the corruption. The receipts are piling up and they're damning. We have public records showing the departure of senior career officials at rates that dwarf previous administrations. We have the testimony of prosecutors who have left, describing political interference in cases ranging from January 6th prosecutions to civil rights investigations. We have the spectacle of the FBI's own Agents Association warning that field offices are operating at dangerously low staffing levels, with veteran agents retiring early rather than participate in what they see as the politicization of their bureau. And now we have the threat of coordinated resignations, not just individual exits, but organized walkouts designed to draw attention to the rot. And this is where everything changes. Because once these prosecutors leave, they don't just take their expertise with them. They take their institutional memory. They take the cases they were working. They take the relationships with local law enforcement, with witnesses, with judges. Replacing a 20-year veteran AUSA isn't like hiring a new associate at a law firm. It takes years to develop the judgment, the trial skills, the understanding of how complex federal cases actually work. And when they walk out in protest, they're creating gaps in the justice system that can't be filled by political appointees or loyalists who got their jobs through connections rather than competence. The walls are closing in on this administration's ability to maintain even the pretense of a functioning Justice Department. You can already see the panic in the way they're responding, not by addressing the concerns of career staff, but by accelerating the purge. The timeline is tightening. Every day that passes without addressing the Epstein files cover-up, without stopping the weaponization of the department against journalists and political opponents, without showing basic human decency in response to violent crime, more career officials reach their breaking point, and once they leave, they're not coming back. So what comes next? If these mass resignations materialize, and all indications suggest they will, we're looking at a federal law enforcement apparatus that simply cannot perform its basic functions. Investigations into white-collar crime will stall. Civil rights enforcement will effectively cease. Counterintelligence operations will be crippled. The best-case scenario is a years-long rebuilding process that requires a complete change in leadership and a recommitment to independence. The worst-case scenario is the permanent transformation of the DOJ and FBI into political police forces, staffed by loyalists who prioritize protecting the powerful over protecting the public. But there's a third scenario, one that these resignations are designed to trigger: public outrage forcing congressional intervention. When prosecutors are willing to destroy their own careers to sound the alarm, it creates a credibility that partisan critics can't match. These aren't Democrats or Republicans making political arguments. These are career law enforcement officials saying, "I cannot participate in this corruption." That testimony carries weight in courtrooms, in congressional hearings, and in the public consciousness. The consequences extend far beyond the walls of the Hoover Building or the federal courthouse in Minneapolis. When the Justice Department loses its legitimacy, when the FBI can't recruit top talent because no one wants to work for an institution in collapse, the entire federal system of law enforcement becomes suspect. State and local agencies lose their federal partners. International cooperation on everything from drug trafficking to cybercrime breaks down. And the signal sent to every corrupt actor, every predator, every criminal enterprise is clear. No one is watching anymore. The cops have left the building. This story isn't over. In fact, it's accelerating. The press conference on Friday wasn't an endpoint. It was a warning shot. When Todd Blanche stood there, unable or unwilling to address the crisis unfolding under his watch, he proved the protesters right. He proved that this leadership doesn't care about the rule of law, doesn't care about the integrity of the institution, and certainly doesn't care about the career professionals who built their lives around serving justice. What happens next will depend on whether the public understands what these resignations really mean. They're not just employment decisions. They're moral statements. They're career prosecutors saying they would rather be unemployed than be complicit in the betrayal of justice. And if we ignore their warning, if we treat this as just another bureaucratic shuffle, we'll deserve the justice system we get. But if we listen, if we demand accountability, if we insist that the Department of Justice remain independent and honorable, then these resignations might be the beginning of the reckoning, not the end. Stay informed. The next move will be critical. Because when the people sworn to uphold the law start walking out rather than breaking it, you know the crisis has already arrived. And the only question left is whether the rest of us will act before it's too late.